My dad, Larry Linton, the only true servant leader willing to stand in the arena and fight for your freedoms.
Larry is a man of God, and he will move heaven and earth to protect the people in district.
Too many elected politicians act like chameleons.
My name's Mike. I'm Larry's neighbor. I bought the house behind him. I trust Larry to give me an honest answer.
And what's important to me is faith, family, and my freedom. And I believe these values are also held by Larry Linton.
More important than ever, I believe, in our lifetime to really stand up and fight for what's right. And Larry's doing that, and I'm supportive of it.
We need to replace career politicians in Nashville with leaders willing to stand for what is right, even if it's not popular. People who feel a calling and are not looking to make a profession out of it.
You're not going to find a more honest, straightforward, and passionate individual, I don't believe. Larry is what you see is what you get. He's honest.
Listen, if you are looking for a true conservative who's passionate about the state of Tennessee, the people that live in it, and wanting to make a difference in a meaningful way, Larry's your guy.
Good Monday morning, ladies and gentlemen. Coming to you all this week from Casper, Wyoming once again. On this week's episode, we will continue with the remainder of my discussion about servant leadership with Tennessee State Representative Chris Todd. I will also talk some more about the failed leadership of the Tennessee Republican Party's State Executive Committee, or really the State Primary Board, and their vote to uphold a tainted election here in Tennessee. I will talk about what that means going forward for future elections, both primary and general, all around the volunteer state. Keep in mind, folks, that unlike trading in the stock market, when it comes to human performance and leadership expectations and leadership performance, past performance absolutely does indicate future performance. I spent the past week taking care of some long overdue maintenance at the house while I prepared to head out west for this client engagement. As I mentioned in last week's show, I did visit with the ortho surgeon and we scheduled my knee surgery. It will be done Thanksgiving week. I should be able to carve the turkey while in crutches. It will be a tight schedule to get the outside of the house decorated for the holidays, conduct another client engagement, have the surgery, and then do the recovery period. It also looks like Denise and I may be traveling to Virginia Beach for a training event for the company I am contracted with, as well as their annual Christmas party. It has been a long time since we were in Virginia Beach together. In fact, it was back in 2018 when we traveled to attend the retirement ceremony for one of my good friends. Now, I was last there in 2019 for a training event, and coincidentally, it was right after a surgery that time as well. That was another whirlwind in travel and surgery time. Denise and I had just returned from a pilgrimage to Israel with our church. I had my left rotator cuff repaired in Mountain City in November, and then traveled with my arm in a sling to Virginia Beach the first week of December. I guess this time it will be while I'm using crutches instead of my arm in a sling. But more importantly, my bride will get a chance to shop at one of her favorite stores on the planet, the Navy Exchange. The company will be putting us up in a hotel right on the oceanfront boardwalk. A quick little getaway, but not for too long because Denise has to get back here in the house in time to bake her 8,750 Christmas cookies that I will have to be passing out to friends and neighbors while using crutches. I'll be putting together 2 episodes over the next week because I will be in the internet dead zone in North Dakota the week after next, and do not want to leave you guys hanging with a break in between episodes if I can help it. Now, with a recap and schedule update out of the way, let's get on with this week's episode of the Liberty Leadership and Lies podcast, where Representative Chris Todd and I continue our discussion about the topic of servant leadership, and I will go into the details of the failed leadership of the Tennessee Republican Party. So let's take a stand in the arena together again this week, folks, and get on with the show. Welcome to the Liberty Leadership and Lies podcast. On this show, we will discuss the assaults on our liberty by the very institution we the people created to secure our liberty. We will also compare and contrast the actions of people in leadership positions to the servant leadership that is needed to protect our God-given, constitutionally protected rights. Additionally, we will break down the many lies that elected and unelected officials in government and media spin every day in order to secure for themselves positions of power and influence that are antithetical to the system of government our founding fathers created and passed down to us. Yeah, that was a very sticky wicket last session. I don't know, I haven't followed where you fall on that bill, or the school choice or the voucher or the education freedom. Here's where I fall on it. I don't think it's the government's job to bribe me with my own tax money so I can purchase freedom from an organization that's supposed to protect it.
That's a reasonable point,
right?
But the argument I hear most often is we shouldn't be using taxpayer dollars to go to private organizations, private institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm sorry, that ship's already sailed. We build roads with private companies every single day in this country, in this state, with taxpayer dollars. We send it to healthcare facilities that are owned privately. I mean, the list goes on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, taxpayer dollars get spent with private entities thousands of times a day. It is not that. So that argument doesn't fly. It just doesn't. Now, if you want to, again, have another principle that you want to hang your hat on, that may be, as you were stating, but just that we shouldn't have taxpayer funds going to private entities. Sorry, we do literally thousands of times a day.
The government has to rely on private entities to do the functions that they can't do, and they're not built to do. I understand that. Yeah, absolutely. So within the General Assembly, are there already plans? I know we don't have like the federal government. I've stopped calling it federal. It's the national government. There's no such thing as federalism anymore. But anyway, they have a freedom caucus, and I've heard maybe there might be some machinations with starting a freedom caucus within the Tennessee General Assembly. Have you heard anything about that?
A few years ago, maybe, I'm trying to think, it was 4 or 5 years ago, there was one member that wanted to do something like that. And it just never really got a foothold because I think most of us are freedom loving individuals, and we're going to be supportive of that. Whether you have a caucus, whether you have an association or not, as under our current rules, which could change in January, but under our current rules, any kind of caucus that is formed has to be approved. And I honestly don't remember the process. I don't know if the speaker has to approve that or if it goes to the body. I don't remember, but because we just hadn't had anybody so far that I know of has brought a new caucus idea up for the consideration. There may be something I'm not aware of, but I guess we probably already do have that. It's just not formal.
Okay.
Many of us know our colleagues, and we know who is like-minded on a given issue, and sometimes that issue varies. Right. So I may have 30 Republicans that I feel like are for school choice of some whatever the flavor that looks like, and I may have 30 that are very much staunch Second Amendment supporters. They understand the Second Amendment, they know what it's about, and they know what we need to do to defend it and to correct our laws related to that. But those might not be the same 30 people.
Right.
So, that you might have 25 of the first group and 5 that aren't in that first group that make up your 30. And then I'm just using that as a wild example. So, I think each of us knows who we can trust, and we know who is like-minded on a given issue for the most part, and we talk. We work that out behind the scenes as well, and in kind of working the members on a given issue of where do you stand on this, what do you think, and can I count on your vote for that?
Right. Which that dives into a whole nother question. Like, I think we discussed this on the phone the other day. We have a supermajority Republican, General Assembly, but we don't often govern like we have a Republican supermajority. You got any thoughts on that?
I don't think this will get at exactly what you're asking, but this is a piece of the puzzle. One of the things I've learned, not only how diverse we are in the General Assembly, but we all represent different types of people. I mean, of course, people are the same everywhere, but mindsets are different in places. So we have some Republican colleagues that represent districts that are blue or slightly purple, leaning toward the blue side. And if that one person was not there representing that district with an R by their name, it'd be a D by their name. There would be a Democrat in that district. That's just a fact of life. But that one person is moderate. You would consider moderate. You would consider a rhino, all kinds of definitions and names. But realistically, it's either that person or Democrat. And so that person, though, with an R by their name, helps us keep not only the supermajority, but also on procedural votes, push back against the knuckleheads that want to try to take over the General Assembly and shout us down and be disruptive and all of that. So there's a value there of having an R, even if they might seem too moderate for me and you. There is a value there, and that's it's frustrating. I'll tell you, from someone that is a staunch conservative, it's frustrating to see those folks sometimes slip out on a critical vote and not be present or vote against what we conservatives would want. But I have to remind myself that there is still a value there in having that person with an R by their name versus a Democrat sitting in that seat. So it's a hard pill to swallow, but you need to realize that is part of the real world. You can't ignore that. And there's I know at least one race this year that what I would consider more conservative candidate, I guess, won from what I'm hearing, and it's still questionable whether they will carry the district or not in the general election. Wow. So we could be a seat loss there for Republicans because a more conservative Republican was elected. Don't know for sure. I mean, I'm not that familiar with the district, so I'm just getting hearsay. But that is something to consider.
So they're more like a specialized tool instead of a general use tool.
Right.
Okay. So how do you plan on fostering a culture of servant leadership within the Republican supermajority while in the General Assembly?
I think for me, first and foremost, it's setting an example. Number one, being consistent, being someone that can be trusted, a man of high integrity, never lie, shoot straight with people. You're never perfect in that. Sometimes things get misconstrued, but that is very high on my list. It's set that example first and foremost, and that catches people see that, especially if you have successes, then they're going to see that that's part of that formula for success. Then beyond that, I think just encouraging your colleagues to do that, to look at look at the big picture, be trustworthy for sure, and don't let your colleagues down, and don't let your constituents down. Just be straightforward, and if you don't know something, say you don't know. If you promise somebody something, you better stick to it.
Right.
That's just one of those things that we learn early on in the legislature, that we have the opportunity to learn. Some do, some don't. That if someone asks you of your position on a vote, like in committee, for example, and you give them a position, yes or no, you need to stick to that. Or at least before the vote's taken, go tell them that your mind has changed. You have the ability to change it. That's not a problem, but you have to communicate that, because if I go into a committee and it's a 9-member committee and I've got 5 yeses, firm yeses for my bill, and one of those flips, there's a lot of trust broken there. we've got major issues, and a lot of hurt feelings for sure. And generally, that person that gave you that yes and changed their mind without telling you probably won't be trusted with much of anything after that. And word gets around that one representative they let down will tell people, and it's gonna spread. Folks will see it, they will know it, and then your reputation is damaged probably permanently.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always equate to trust is like a mirror. You break it, but you can put it back together. It'll still function as a mirror, but you're always going to see those cracks in that mirror.
That's right. You're exactly right.
Speaking of that committee thing, are you in favor of the rule change that Representative Ritchie tried to introduce last session for recording votes in the committees in the House?
I would certainly be in favor of electronic vote taking without question. Every vote is recorded now, whether somebody argues that it is or isn't. Everybody on the committee is either a yes or no, or they abstain on every vote. So even though it's a voice vote, if the chairman rules that that the ayes have it, then everybody on that committee voted yes, unless you tell the clerk you didn't. And so that's an immediate thing. You have to record yourself as a no in that situation. And I will also say that chairmen have quite a bit of leeway to hear the committee, and they're in a position physically to hear everyone. Members quite often are distracted. Someone will pop in from a side room and ask a question or hand them a folder or something like that, where they don't realize there's a vote being taken, for example, and their voices, maybe they say it kind of weak or low. I've had that happen on bills that I've had. Then the chairman has to figure out what he heard. Did I hear? I thought I heard. It's not how loud somebody is, but how many yeses and how many no's. So the knife cuts both ways. I've literally had bills killed that I thought should have been a yes, should have passed based on what I heard and the votes I had counted beforehand. But then I've had bills that the chairman knew needed to pass. There were constitutional issues, and that the ayes and noes were close enough. He cast his vote in the decision, so he doesn't say aye or nay, but he can interject his voice at that point when he's listening. And I certainly know of one or two events where someone in the audience probably thought it failed, but the chairman passed it because he knew it needed to pass. So it cuts both ways. But yeah, I mean, certainly we do that on the floor where all of our votes are, you punch a button one way or the other. And it doesn't take too much longer. Now, granted, if we went through a roll call like the Senate does, it's going to add quite a bit of time to our day, to our weeks that we're there. I think, I don't know how much. We've never done that, so it's hard to say. But I've had individuals say, I will personally pay for the electronic system in every committee room, which we don't really have a mechanism for somebody to do that. But it's certainly a nice gesture, and I wouldn't mind at all if that was the case. If we had that, if it didn't add time, and you could just reach up and punch your button, it would save the chairman some trouble, quite frankly. But there will be some good bills that die as a result of that, because certain people aren't in the room, or somebody was quiet, they were distracted, and you've already talked to them, so they were a yes or a no, but they just didn't say anything. So the chairman generally knows those kind of things and has to make that call.
Let's pause for a break right here. Well, it's been very, very enlightening talking to you, Representative Todd. You got anything for the audience that you'd like to share?
Well, I think, as I've touched on before, one of the things that I'm most concerned about our society is the lack of education, especially around the Constitution. Folks just don't know it. They don't understand it. They have preconceived notions that they run on every single day. And the Democrat Party, quite frankly, is a master of that. They have their own version of the Constitution that is pretty amazing, where they came up with some of this stuff. I mean, I was reading a platform in another state last night. There was a survey I was working on. It referenced another state, the Democratic platform, and I read through it, and it was eye opening. I mean, you wouldn't believe the rights you have, Larry. I mean, it's just the right to health care. What does that mean? You know, so their lack of understanding of the Constitution puts them in a position where they're claiming that we have rights to free access to health care is what they're really getting at, which is a socialist communist idea. And we don't have the right to health care provided by you. If you're a doctor, you don't have to give me care at no cost. I can't force you to do that, and the government can't force you to do that, but they want that. That's just where they are. And I think that just comes from a lack of overall teaching and understanding. And they have convinced themselves of some of these things they're absolute lies, unfortunately, because they don't know the truth. That's one of the most concerning things to me. And I'm really hoping we can put some things in place. I think it's up to the local school boards, quite frankly, that they need to be the ones implementing these constitutional studies. And it should be from first grade on. It should be through the entire school curriculum, their whole career, to get them immersed into the Constitution and what it says, and it says what it means, and it means what it says. Don't read anything else into it. And of course, we've got recent court decisions that uphold that and have clarified where others have made mistakes in years past of trying to rule their own opinion of what they want it to say in today's society versus what it truly means and says. So I think we definitely need a big effort to get us back to educating our kids in the Constitution first and foremost.
Absolutely. I think the downhill slide for that was when the federal government took over an unenumerated power of the education system. And because what government is actually going to educate its citizens on its own limitations?
Exactly.
So the Constitution is definitely not taught because it's a list of negative rights is what it is. It tells the government what it cannot do, not what the people can, but what the government cannot do. And it's very, very specific on what it cannot do. And yet
absolutely
we are where we are right now. We're, like I said at the opening of the show, the government is now in every part of every American's lives. And that was definitely, it was meant for the states to have that primary role. And as I've stated in the past on some of my programs, and I think based upon your political philosophy as a conservative and as a states' rights guy, the state governments are the ones that are supposed to stand in the gap between an overreaching federal government and the citizens. They're the ones that are supposed to say, that's not in the Constitution. You cannot do that within the boundaries of this state's borders. So I hope we get more like-minded people like that in the General Assembly soon and say, hey, push back. I don't care who the president of the United States is. Let's just get back to the Constitution where the states are sovereign.
Yes.
Is that, I mean, it's in the very name of our country. It's the United States of
right.
Individual sovereign states coming together, giving power, certain limited powers to a federal government or a national government to provide for the common defense and promote the general welfare. That's your job. Everything else is ours.
That's it. That's it. And we've got to get back to that. And it's not going to be overnight. It didn't happen overnight, but it's going to take folks like me and like you continuing to pound our fist on the desk and say, not anymore. We're going to push back, and we're going to now take some things back that y'all have taken. But it certainly is going to take a Congress to be responsible to the people and to the states and do the same thing. They can start closing some of these agencies and departments down, but they've got to have the willpower to do that. And now, granted, the flip side of that coin is states are going to have to pick up the tab for that. I mean, but we should be sending less money to DC if they're having less responsibilities, and it may increase the state budgets to cover those things if they're necessary things to be covered. But that's our decision. And
Right.
when we can make that decision much better than they can in DC.
And
So hopefully we'll have the partners on the federal level that will join us in that effort over the next decade or two to try to pull some of that back.
absolutely. Well, again, Representative Todd, thank you for coming on the Liberty Leadership and Lies program. I wish you the best of success in the upcoming year, and hope to reach out to you again sometime maybe during the General Assembly to get a pulse of what's going on.
I would love to come on with you anytime, Larry. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care. Well, folks, that wraps up the discussion with Tennessee State Representative Chris Todd. You can find out more about him by visiting his website, christoddfortn.com. The web address is shown in the banner below and will be in the description of the video on Rumble. As he mentioned in our discussion, Representative Todd does not have a general election challenger, so he will be returning for the next General Assembly session when it convenes in January. We most assuredly need more constitutional originalists like Chris Todd serving as elected representatives. You can follow him at his website. You can also follow every other state representative and state senator on the General Assembly's website. In fact, I encourage every Tennessean to do so. The individual members' websites do not list every vote they take, but the state's website does. On the General Assembly's website, you can track bills as well as watch video of committee proceedings as they have discussion, debate, and vote on bills. I'm sure the audience knows that I will be tracking it very closely during the next legislative session, not only to call out the fake conservatives, you know who I'm referring to here, but to offer thanks and congratulations to members that actually do the work of the people and not the corporatists. Now let's get to the matter of the failure, another failure in a long list of failures of the Tennessee Republican Party. On Saturday, the 7th of September, the state primary board of the Tennessee GOP sent a very loud and very clear message, not only to the Republican voters of the state, but also to the leftists and commies in Tennessee, as well as around the country. By a vote of 41-7, the state primary board upheld the primary election for District 33. This was a GOP primary contest between the incumbent representative, John Reagan, and his challenger, Rick Scarborough. Now, you may know that I'm not a big fan of the incumbency rate in state and national elections, but I am also not a fan of how the Tennessee Republican Party's leadership, primarily Mr. Scott Golden and his cronies and sycophants in the state executive committee, I'm not fond of how they treat Republican voters here in Tennessee. For some background info on this situation, what the audience needs to know is that partially due to some shenanigans in that primary race, Rick Scarborough will be the Republican nominee for state representative in the upcoming November general election. The meeting of the GOP state primary board, really, it was just a kangaroo court, that happened that day, September 7th, it only lasted about 90 minutes. Yep, it only took an hour and a half for those 41 failed leaders to give away the farm with the message they sent. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself here, though. Let's get back to the events that occurred that day. The clown show began, but do not think that the end result was not already predetermined, folks. The clown show began after some brief opening remarks by the state primary board members, followed by Representative Reagan making his plea to set aside the results of the primary election because of illegal crossover voting by Democrats. Apparently, identity theft isn't only an individual financial concern, as Representative Reagan appropriately pointed out that crossover voters, they are a whole new type of identity thief. They are political identity thieves. Thieves that right now and going into the future, which you can be sure of, that the Tennessee Republican Party enabled. Their actions enabled more of their theft of influence from the rightful decision makers in GOP primary elections. And that would be the bona fide Republicans. Members of the primary board then spoke after Representative John Reagan and his primary challenger, Rick Scarborough, along with Scarborough's attorney that addressed the board. Here's an area that I have a problem with, and the state executive committee hopes to flim-flam the everyday Republican voter with semantics and slick words. Many of those members of the state primary board expressed frustration with the General Assembly in failing to close primaries. Members did not ask questions of the candidates. Instead, they presented arguments for and against Reagan's challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand that voter participation is low in our elections, especially those that are off-year ones and those elections that do not have the entire slate of state and national candidates on it. We've discussed that many times on this program. However, state primary elections fall entirely within the purview of the political parties in the individual states, all the way down to the county political parties. The voter participation rates are the way they are mainly because of the political parties. Remember, the political parties set the state primary schedules up. There are a number of things completely within their power to do that they fail to do to encourage more participation. And because they don't do those things, especially in states without closed primary elections, we get crossover voting. The Tennessee GOP's bylaws serve as the stick and the honey right now. They, the powers that be, the state executive committee and Scott Golden, they use them when it is convenient to prevent actual conservatives from running for elections. They ignore them when it's convenient to support their preferred candidates in primary elections. And they ignore their responsibility to ensure that Republicans, bona fide Republicans, are selecting their candidates in the voting booth. When they are called out on it, they blame the state legislature for not taking action, when the action is completely up to them to take. The state's only role in primary elections is to have equipment and people supporting the primary elections. The political parties are solely responsible for how they are conducted and who can participate in them. Heck, they even won a lawsuit in the state of Tennessee where the state Supreme Court stated that state primary elections, it's all theirs. And because of that lawsuit and the retaliation by the TNGOP, they tweaked their bylaws some more recently to punish the individual that sued the Tennessee GOP. So please, don't let them fool you with their talk about the need for the General Assembly to close the primaries. The Tennessee GOP has that power already, and they failed in enforcing it at that meeting. The message that the Tennessee GOP stated loud and clear is this: Democrats and commies can now play the deciding role in which type of Republican gets to represent the districts in the General Assembly. They did that because they count on these crossover votes and the votes of non-bona fide Republicans, as well as people without a history of supporting the state and county GOP, keeping their preferred candidates in office. In the closing segment, I will share with you the shocking number of non-bona fide, meaning not active voters, casting a vote in the primary election I was just in. The combined number of non-bona fide or inactive voters, along with crossover voters in Sevier County, those numbers are astounding. Not only do we need to throw out the weak trans publicans from our General Assembly, but we also need to get them out of the Tennessee Republican Party's State Executive Committee. Sadly, but not surprisingly, the two SEC members for the district I live in were part of the 41 selfish, failed leaders that allowed that tainted election to stand. It wasn't surprising because we already knew how they viewed the GOP's bylaws based upon their inaction earlier this year when the Sevier County Republican Party chairman and two other members of the county executive committee violated the bylaws in the support of their good old boy candidate. No repercussions whatsoever. Nobody held accountable for that, nor will there be if the same people are allowed to serve in leadership positions within our county's Republican Party. There will be more to come on this in the future episodes, especially with how we can correct the situation here in Sevier County and around the state. For now, though, I'm going to take a brief break before I come back with God's Word and my closing thoughts. So I'll be right back. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in this week. I really enjoyed my conversation with Representative Todd and hope to get him on again in the future. Once the General Assembly is in full swing and the commies, as well as the establishment Republicans, reveal their cards, even the ones up their sleeves. I've already started making inquiries to people that I would like to have on in future episodes, and we'll let you know how those efforts pan out. I'm already locking in the next guest, and this pastor is well known throughout East Tennessee for taking a stand against evil. I've had the pleasure of meeting him in person 3 times now, one of which was at the prayer walk last year in downtown Sevierville when the Alphabet Mafia was hosting one of their family-friendly, all-ages drag show at the Civic Center. This week's wisdom from God's Word comes to us from the book of James, chapter 3, verses 14 through 18. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. You know, all too often, what we, the people, hear from those in elected positions are words that sow bitter jealousy among the people, or those words reflect their selfish ambition. It is always earthly and unspiritual, and very often demonic. We see it play out on the national stage all the time, sowing disorder and discord among the citizens so they can stay in their positions of power and control. They are almost all members of the rules for thee and not for me crowd. From legislation that exempt members of the elected class from those same laws they impose upon us, all the way to the bylaws they create to govern the conduct of the different political parties. The bylaws that are applied differently depending on the desired outcome by the new aristocracy. All of Tennessee just witnessed that in the conduct of last week's meeting to consider Representative Reagan's challenge to his primary election results, as well as the people here in Sevier County who saw the blatant disregard and breaking of the GOP's bylaws to benefit a member of the Good Old Boy Network. While there were only 67 definite Democrat crossover votes in the August primary here, not enough to challenge the outcome, but consider the fact that there were only 2,005 bona fide Republicans that voted in that primary as compared to the 2,844 non-bona fide voters. Why so few bona fide and so many non-bona fide, you may wonder? Well, that is because the Sevier County Republican Party is nothing more than a country club party that does no work to grow the party or to activate voters, let alone have events to generate participation in the process. They feel quite secure in their position and will do nothing to change it. Remember what I told you were some of the first words said by the new Sevier County GOP chair when he was elected to his position last year? It is this, quote, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." Well, chairman and Republican Party voters in Sevier County, it is broke, and you won't realize it until it's too late if you stay on the current course. Yes, my fellow Tennesseans, we can and must do better going forward into the future. Until next week, stand in the arena with me. Reveille, it's time to wake up.